the lesson this morning, the call of Moses. Now, if we'll think back, we've had two other lessons. One of them was the Israel being enslaved in Egypt, and the next lesson was the birth of Moses. And last week we was studying the birth of Moses. And you know, we can read this in the Bible, and you know, there's maybe, well, we're in the third chapter of Exodus, and I think his birth was recorded on the second chapter, I believe it was. But from his birth to where we're studying right now consumes of quite a few years. If memory serves me right, I believe it's 80 years. And so Moses, I think at this time is close to 80 years old. And so, you know, there's been a lot of people that are still enslaved in Egypt. Maybe some of them remembers Moses' birth, but then there's a lot of them that has died that since Moses has been born.
And left Egypt.
And left, yeah. But you know, you take from Moses' birth to 80 years later, you know, that's a long time to be in slavery. Just this little period, you know, we start reading and we think, well, you know, the Exodus is just about ready to happen, you know, and it's Moses' birth and so on, and then, you know, 4 or 5 chapters later, they're being laid out of Egypt, you know. But that time, between that time, was quite a few years. It was a lot of years. So let's look at this then. The call of Moses. God had a time for Moses. Moses was, I feel that Moses was saved from being killed for a purpose. When he was born, remember, you know, the Pharaoh had made a decree that all the boy babies be killed, but for some reason Moses was concealed, and then had compassion upon him, and raised up and became a man then, and it was all because God seen into the future and said, this is the person that I want to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. But you know, it just don't happen overnight. It just doesn't happen in a month or in a year or in a decade even. And in this case, it's 80 years. It's 8 decades. So just think about that. How much time, how much more suffering that the children of Israel did, you know, from the time that he left Egypt. I'm thinking that he was around 40 years old when he left Egypt and went to the Midian, or I think I'm saying that right, but went to his father-in-law to tend sheep. Well, he tended sheep for 40 years, and now all of a sudden we're at the place that we're at in our lesson here. So let's kind of take a look at it. Our memory verse is, "For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost." Okay, we'll run in. I'll run into that verse here a little bit later on, and after the lesson there. And so let's look at Exodus here. Exodus 3:1. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flocks to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. You know, during a dry time, we here in Oklahoma gets, especially in the fall and in the winter time, we have a lot of dry grass, and a lot of time it's dry and the wind gets up, and you know, somebody strikes a match or something and a fire gets away from them, and the next thing you know, it's burned several acres of ground, you know. But this little old bush here, I don't know how big it was. It might have been a pretty good sized bush. I don't know. But it was a bush, and it caught Moses' eyes. Oh, there's a bush on fire over there. I don't think that being in the desert here, that was uncommon for bushes to catch on fire. I think I read somewhere where that it was kind of common that a bush would catch on fire. But the odd thing about this bush, he saw the fire out there. Well, it'll go out here in a little bit, but it just continued to burn, continued to burn, and continued to burn. And after a while, well, Moses probably thought to himself, well, that thing should be consumed by now. Let me take a look at that thing, you know, and see what's going on. And so that's where we're at here. God got the attention of Moses through a bush, through fire. God caught the attention of Moses. Moses was busy taking care of his father-in-law's sheep. Probably had been doing this for years and years and years. He might have even been part owner of them. Moses might have. I don't know. But here he was taking care of his father's sheep, or his father-in-law's sheep. I often wonder, how old was his father-in-law? If Moses was 80 years old, how old was his father-in-law? You know, he must have been fairly old, or something, you know, because like I said, with Moses being 80. But anyway, he still was raising sheep, and that's where God had him to be. You know, Moses, I don't know if he really knew that he was going to be the one that would lead the children of Israel out. I know at one time when he had to flee Egypt, he thought he was going to be the one to lead them out, but you know, that didn't turn out so well when he killed the Egyptian, and then the Israelites said, well, are you going to do to us like you did them? And that didn't work out quite right, you know, and so, well, maybe I just had a thought in that passed through my brain, and maybe that's not what's going to happen. But you know, when a person tries to get ahead of God, we get in trouble.
That's true.
When we try to get ahead, and you know, if we lag behind, it's the same problem. We're going to have problems then. You know, we have to be right with God all the time, because God knows when the perfect time is. We might think we know when a good time is, but most of the time, I think it's about 10 times out of 10, that it's always the wrong time, you know. You know, this would be a perfect time for whatever, you know, a revival or anything. I mean, it could be something good like a revival. This would be a perfect time to have a revival. But you know, if we don't get the leading of God, and God decides, or God has already decided when the perfect time is, and we're picking another time, it's not going to be the right time. Yeah. I mean, and that can be anything in a person's life. When the time comes, God makes things happen to the best of all of us then. And so here he is, he's out here in the desert, and it says, and he came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. Am I saying that right? Yeah. Okay. Why is this mountain called the mountain of God? Was it special or something? Or what? Why would God have picked this mountain out and said, this is my mountain. Well, the only explanation I have of that is what is yet to come. Is what is yet to come. If we will just kind of file this to the back of our mind and hang on to it for maybe a few more lessons, and we'll understand the reason why this is called the Mountain of God. I'm going to try and remind you when we get there. I'm going to try and remind you to, hey, remember back in Exodus 3:1, and then we will discuss this. But right now, it is called the Mountain of God because of a future event that's going to happen. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in the flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. God's attention, his attention was wait a minute, I'm focused. I've got to go focus on this. And you know, God's got to get our full focus when He calls us. We got to have 100% of our focus on God. Because if we don't, if we're kind of haphazard, God's not going to get through to us. You know, He may have to slap us around a little bit, you know, to get our full focus. But you know, this got Moses' full focus here. Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not consumed. And seeing a strange fire, he was called, and because of what happened there later, something we will read about in another lesson is why the mountain was called Horeb, or it is also called Sinai. And now most of you might realize, okay, now that kind of rings a bell. But that's what it was. Suddenly Moses saw a fire in the bush. You know, my mind goes back to we had a bush on the farm up there in Missouri, and it was called the fire in the bush. And early in the spring, I don't know if that's the name that my mom always called it, was fire in the bush. Is what it was. And early in the spring, it would grow up. You know, I mean, it would blossom out, and there'd be red blossoms on it. And you know, just like any other blossoms, you know, they'd bloom and be so pretty. And then, of course, you know, the blossom fall off, and then it'd just be more or less a bush then. But I don't know if it got its name from this, or if that was even the name of it. But that's what Mom always called it, and fire in the bush. And every time that she would say that, my mind always came back to this, you know. And I said, I just kind of wonder if that bush kind of looked like that, you know, that Moses saw. But I doubt whether it was. I don't think it had blossoms on it, but it was a fire. It was a fire is what it was. Suddenly Moses saw a fire in the bush. It was different fire than Moses had ever seen. The fire did not burn the bush. Moses went over to see why. And, you know, this is mentioned also in Acts. I'll read that here in a little bit here. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. But let's go on to verse 4. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. You know, God got Moses' attention, and you know, why did God have to call him then by name? Because he wanted to make sure that he had the right person. Not that God had the right person, but that Moses knew who God was. That's what I'm talking about. And you know, when somebody speaks your name, you know they know me. I had an incident of that here the other day. It's been maybe a month ago. A little young boy at the school, and he said something, "Hi, Mr. Larry," or something like that. And I thought, how does he know my name? You know, and I asked him, I said, how do you know my name? And he said, well, you work with my mother. And I says, oh, okay, you're Simi's son then. She's a girl that I work with, you know. And I said, you're Simi's son. Yeah. He goes and had a big old grin on his face. You know, we had something in common. We knew somebody that both of us knew, you know. And of course, I had seen him before, but I had forgot. But you know, when somebody mentions your name and you don't know who they are, it kind of throws you for a loop. But you know, when somebody mentions your name, you think, I should know this person somewhere, you know. And I think that's kind of the way Moses was. Moses. And he said, here am I. Don't you remember there was a calling, Samuel? You know, that was kind of the same way. And Samuel wasn't sure who it was. He thought it was Eli, remember? And he goes to Eli. And Eli said, no, I didn't call. Go back to bed, you know. And so he went back to bed, and it happened again. Samuel. He runs to Eli. Eli, I know you called this time, you know. No, I didn't call. Well, Eli gets the idea. Oh, okay, this is God calling him. He said, okay, young man. He said, you go back there and you say, your servant hears, or something to that effect, you know. And Samuel, little bitty old boy, little bitty feller, you know, here he says, Lord, here I am. Lord, here I am. This is what's Moses being 80 years old. He's an old man. And he says, Lord, here I am. Here I am. And he said, draw, and the voice out of the bush there is what he's talking about. Draw not nigh hither. Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. Moses recognized what was going on here. Had God ever talked to him before? I don't know. It don't sound like it probably did. But Moses knew who God was. How did he know that? Probably his mother was the one that taught him. And maybe his father too. But his mother probably had a lot of influence on him. Told him, okay, who's Abraham? Who's Isaac? Who's Jacob? They lived years before, centuries before, 300, 400 years before this, you know. But Moses knew who they were from the teaching. Not through the Bible, because the Bible wasn't written then, but it was through the teachings of his mother. And you know, this was probably a fearful thing, because this don't happen every day. You know, if something happens to a person like this, maybe once in a lifetime, it seems like, you know, man, God's singling me out. You know, God is singling me. God has a work for me to do. Now it's my responsibility to do that work. Why is God calling me? I don't know. Evidently it must be for some important job. Or it's just it's a job that God wants to get done. And he's putting it on me, you know. And not that I'm so great, but I want to be able to do what I can for the Lord. And this is what he said. He says, here am I. And then God speaks. And then he was afraid. And he hid his face. He hid his face. He realized who was really talking to him here. You know, there's a reaccount of this in Acts 7 and 30. Stephen was being brought before the court on some charges that was trumped up there. And he is making a statement here. And he says on Acts 7 and 30, and when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him, he's talking about Moses, in the wilderness of Mount Sinai, an angel of the Lord in the flame of fire in a bush. Verse 31. When Moses saw it, he wondered at the sight. And as he drew near to behold it, the voice of the Lord came unto him. Verse 32, saying, I am the God of thy fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Then Moses trembled and durst not behold. Verse 33, then said the Lord to him, put off thy shoes from thy feet, for the place where thou standest is holy ground. Stephen recited this lesson, this part of the lesson exactly the way it's written in Exodus there, pretty much. Don't you, word for word. Don't you think that Stephen had probably read that before? I think the Bible, some of the Bible had been written, and the Old Testament was what was written at that time. And Stephen knew what had happened here. And Moses, it was recorded here, and Moses did these things here. The Lord speaks to Moses. Why was the fire different? I think we pretty much explained that. It was because God sent it to draw Moses' attention. And then God called him, Moses, Moses. Moses answered, here am I. He was ready to listen, and he was ready to obey. You know, Moses, okay, a big responsibility here. And you know, when God gives us a responsibility, it's always big. No matter how little we might think it is, it's big. And it needs to be carried out to the fullest. It needs to be carried out to the best of our ability. What God gives us, that's how He wants it carried out. God will be with us. When we get a calling of God, God will be with us. He won't just tell us, here, this needs to be done, and then go and leave us. But He will be there to help us in every step of the way. First, the Lord told him not to come near the bush. He must take off his shoes first. Why? It was because the place was holy ground. What made it holy? Okay, if we could go back to that very spot where Moses saw that bush, would we be required to take off our shoes from that because of that ground that was around that bush? Probably not. Probably not. But at this time, God was there, and Moses had to take his shoes off because God is what makes things holy. It's because of God. No, we you know, if we go to that very same place, it wouldn't be disrespectful, I don't think, to leave your shoes on, because God's not exactly right there, you know, at this time. But you know, if God tells us to take our shoes off, no matter where it's at, we better take them off. We better take them off, because this is a reverence to God, is what it is. What do you think Moses did? I'd say them shoes flew off. He kicked them off as fast as he could, probably. And, you know, because he wanted to be in compliance with the way God had ordered him to be there. God was there. The only thing that makes a thing holy is when God is there. We can't make anything holy. You know, there's religions that thinks that they can make things holy, that there's water holy, that there's idols that's holy, there's altars that are holy, and there's this is holy and that's holy. But you know, God's the only one that can make things holy. That's right. You know, He's the only one. You know, our soul, we can't say, well, I'm holy because of me. That is blaspheming, is what that is. We are holy because God made us that way. And you know, it doesn't make any difference whether it's us or another person. God made each and every one of us holy for His purpose, that has accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior. God said, I am the God of thy father. Who was his father? Don't you remember? Is Amram? or something to that. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that, but he was the God of his father. And then it says there was no Bible yet, but Moses had heard the stories of how God had been with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and others. And then he also says, he says, I'm the God of Abraham. Well, who's Abraham? Everybody knows who Abraham is. Abraham was the one that was called out of the land of Ur, I believe it's Ur, and he wasn't chosen just because of maybe one thing or another, or because he was a nice looking man or something like that, but God had a job for Abraham to do. And Abraham was rewarded because of it, And if we follow God, we're going to be rewarded for it. We are going to be rewarded for it. Oh no, we may not be the richest person in the world, or we may not be the best looking person in the world, or anything like that. I'm not talking about that. That's no reward at all. But knowing God is the reward that I'm talking about there. Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac was the son of Abraham, and the promise went through Isaac. Abraham also had other children, but Isaac was the chosen one that was talking about here. Everybody knows who Isaac was. And then it goes through Jacob, and everybody knows who Jacob was. The son of Isaac and others. And then the 12 tribes of Israel, which Jacob is Israel. Remember, we studied about that, how Jacob's name was changed to Israel. And that's where the 12 tribes of Israel come from. And when Moses heard that, what did he do? He hid his face. This great God, this mighty God, he was afraid to look upon God. God is, if God should be reverenced at all times. Whether we're talking to him, or he's talking to us, or even if we're talking about him, God needs to be reverenced to the fullness. God needs to be reverenced to the fullness. He hid his face, afraid to look upon God. This was more than a sign of reverence. It was real reverence in his heart. We can put on a show of reverence, but real reverence comes from the heart. And it was the fear of God, not a fear of scared, but a fear to do the right thing, to make sure that you do everything according to what God intends for us to do. Brother Bayless, there's some bigger words in this next reading. Could I get you to read that?
Verse 7.
Verse 7 through 10, yes.
And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. And I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good land, and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come up unto me, and I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. Come now therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt.
Do you think Moses knew how many children of Israel there was in Egypt? He probably didn't know the exact number, but he knew there was a bunch of them. Sure. He knew there was a big congregation of them. And here he is, 80 years old, and he's thinking, Lord, couldn't you have found a younger man? Probably. That probably went through his mind. Couldn't you have found a younger man? this was a great big undertaking. You know, he says, the Lord has seen the affliction. And you know, Moses might have even thought, 40 years ago, I probably would have been able to do that. But if you go to question things like that again, question things like that, it wasn't God's time 40 years ago. Now is the time. And this should be an encouragement to every one of us, If God calls us, no matter what age we are, if God calls us, and no matter what condition we're in, God's going to use us. We might grumble and gripe because, we got arthritis or we've can't talk real good. I know that's mine. I can't talk real good, but I try to do the best I can. And we may not use quite the right grammar and things like that. But God helps us.
Yes, He does.
Each and every day. God helps us, And, when He wants us to do something, and He tells us, He says, I want you to go do this, you can't put it on your wife, or on your son, or on the pastor, or on anybody else. When God calls you, He means for you. He means for me, if He says that. And so, God promised to deliver the Israelites here. The Lord told Moses why He had come to him. And what was that reason? Well, look in verse 7 there. I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt. The trouble that they are in, I have seen it. He had heard their cry for help. People, they're in bondage. They were in bondage when Moses was born. They were in bondage before Moses was born. And they were in bondage when Moses was born. They were still in bondage 40 years when he had to flee Egypt. They were still in bondage. And guess what? It's another 40 years or 80 years from the time he was born, and they're still in bondage. And God tells Moses here, I have seen the affliction of my people. He had heard their cry for help. He cared. He was answering. He was starting to answer their prayer. He was answering their prayer. He would deliver them or save them out of their troubles. That's what He was intending to do. That's what He was wanting to do now. The time is right now. He would take them out of Egypt to where? A land flowing with milk and honey. A land full of good things. That land was called Canaan. Had Abraham ever been in Canaan? Had Isaac ever been in Canaan? Had Jacob ever been in Canaan? Yeah, all three of them had been there, and they were promised that land. But then Jacob, through Joseph, wound up in Egypt then, and now God is ready to deliver them out of their bondage. The bondage that people get themselves in is a bondage that can only be broken by God. And we can get ourselves in a lot of fixes. We can get ourselves in a lot of fixes. And God is the only one that can bring us and get us out of there, out of the problems that we get ourselves into in that. There was several parts to this few verses that Brother Bayless read. One part was, I have surely seen the affliction of the people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmakers, for I know their sorrows. Answer from God. That was the answer that God had for them. He had seen that. He had seen that. He's getting ready to take care. Verse 8 is the next part. I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. You know, if God sees God's seen their afflictions all through the 300, 400 years, whatever it was, God had seen it. God seen it from day one, and He had seen it for 300 or 400 years. There was no other living person that seen all 300 or 400 years of the affliction, but God knew it. God seen it there. God knew what they were going through. Now, I like that verse 8. I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Okay. See it starting to work? See how God works? He sees it. He has compassion on it. And now He's getting ready to deliver them. Now let's skip on down to verse 9 and about halfway through it. And I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. Okay, He's seen that. And now let's look at verse 10. And it says, I will send thee unto Pharaoh. He's talking to Moses here. I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Okay. 40 years ago, Moses thought that might be the time that it's going to happen, but that wasn't the time. It took another 40 years out in the wilderness, to be the right time. And now is the time. And guess what? Who'd He call on? The one that thought it was 40 years earlier.
Yeah.
Moses. It was Moses. Moses, now is the time. This land was promised to Abraham back in Genesis 12 and 7. And the Lord appeared unto Abraham and said, Unto thy seed I will give this land. And there built he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. That's found in Genesis 12 and 7. Now this happened years and years and years before. But now, time don't mean anything to God. God is not tied up to time. He is so different from us, because everything is tied to time. At 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, you can guarantee where we're going to be at. We're going to be at church, we're going to be at church, and somewhere around noon that same day, we're going to be released from church. Now that sounds almost like bondage, don't it? But church is going to be over with. And what does most of us do? We eat. That's right, because it's dinner time, That's at 12 o'clock or shortly after, And every day around 12 o'clock, we're starting to look for something to eat, aren't we? Yeah. 12 o'clock is that magic number, it's eating time, we are so bound to time. We are so bound. But God's not bound to time. What did it say? 1,000 years is a one day to Him. It don't. He's not bound to it. Abraham was promised this land years and years and years before. Hundreds of years before. Now is the time for them to go and possess that land. Let's look at verse 11. And Moses said unto God, okay, now we got some questions going through Moses' mind. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Well, think about it, Moses. You became the son of Pharaoh's daughter, so you're an important piece of the puzzle right here. But that didn't make any difference. That didn't make any difference. God seen that Moses was the man that was going to do this here. He says, but who am I to go to Pharaoh? I've had to escape Egypt because of some things that went on. And if I go back, it may be off with his head, you know. And so, who am I? And I should go to Pharaoh. Surely there's somebody down there that could do it, you know. Yeah. Surely somebody down there, you know. And then I'll fall in and help them, whatever I can do, you know. Nope. God said, no, you're the one. And that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt. My, what a task this is going to be. He probably thought. And he said, certainly I will be with thee. This is what God says. Certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto thee that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain. This mountain right here. Well, yeah, if we get that far, don't you think that might have went through his mind? Yeah, if we get that far. But you know, okay, there's a lot of questions that the devil will put in our minds, you know, trying to keep us from putting our full trust in God. You know, that's the devil's work, is to do that. Yeah. Put doubt, fear, questions, and anything else to come in between you and God. Moses had to fight this. Moses had a mission here that he had to do. And you know, there was things coming in his mind. God give him a mission. When God has a work to be done here, he uses a person to do it. He had a work. Now he needed a man. He called Moses. I will send thee, that thou mayest bring forth my people out of Egypt. God had saved baby Moses from death for his work. Moses was surprised. How could he lead the Israelites? 80 years old. 80 years sooner his life was saved. 80 years later, Moses is not just 40, but he's 80. You know? Who am I that I shall bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? However, God knew exactly how it would be done. He knew Moses could not do it alone. He said, certainly I will be with thee. One man and God can get a lot of things accomplished. One woman and God can get a lot of things accomplished. God gave him a token to prove that it was ready really God who was sending him. Moses could serve God on the mountain after bringing the people out of Egypt. Let's go to verse 13. And Moses said unto God, behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, the God of your fathers have sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, what is his name? What shall I say unto them? And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am has sent me unto you. I am that I am. You know, I'm going to try and bring this out here in a way that we can kind of understand I am that I am. You know, if I would say I am, now I'm not saying I am in these words, but I am that Larry Williams. Okay, you get that? I am that. You might have heard of Larry Williams, but I am that Larry Williams. I can't say I am that Brother Bayless, because I'm not. I'm not. You know, you can't say that you're somebody else. You know. In this reading here, I am that I am. I am was the word that they used for Jehovah. And when God says, I am that Jehovah, then they realized what was going on here. You know, and He is because He has always been. You know, nobody, nothing else can make them claims. Nothing else. You know, we say, and I don't care if scientists says that the earth is billions of years old. You know, it had a start. God did not have a start. God's always been. Even the earth, and nobody's older than the earth, you know, so you know, you can't make that claim. But even the earth had a start. You don't believe that? Look at verse 1 and 1 of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. God was there, and it sounds to me like the heaven and the earth wasn't there yet. And however many years that's been, you can argue with scientists or whatever, but you know, in the beginning, you know, God was already there. This is what he's talking about. I am that I am. I am. God's name. Moses had no Bible as he had to tell him about God. Other nations worship make-believe gods. How would he tell his people which God this was? He asked God his name. God said his name is I am. It suits him. He is the only real God. He always was, always is, and always will be. Now there's three things right there that is very important. He always was, always is, and always will be.
Amen.
Now we can rest a lot of peace in that. You know, we can put our trust in something in God. We can put our trust in God and be assured that He's going to take care of us on what this says. He is always the same. No one made Him. He just is. God's name, Jehovah, means I am. God gave Moses 3 miracles to show Pharaoh and the Israelites, to prove that God had sent him. Moses went back to Egypt, taking his rod with him, which he would do the miracles. He met Aaron, his brother. Aaron would be Moses' spokesman. They showed the miracles to the Israelites. The people believed them. What was the 3 miracles? Does anybody know what the 3 miracles was that God gave him? You remember he told him to throw down his rod. And it became a snake. And you know, Moses kind of backed up. I would too, because I don't like snakes, you know. But and he backed up, or you know. But God told him, He says, take it by the tail. Now that would have been hard for me to do, because I don't want to touch a snake either. I seen a snake just last Friday, I guess it was. I was kind of working in the garden there a little bit, and a snake about this long. You know, and I didn't want to touch it even, you know. And I'm sure that his staff was probably this long. Well, the snake would have been the same length, wouldn't it? I would think, you know. I don't think it'd be just that long, you know. But he told him, he said, take it by the tail. And he took it by the tail and become a rod again, you know. Okay, another miracle. He said, put your hand in your coat there. And when he pulled it out, it was lepers. Just as leopard as it could be. And he said, put it back in there. And when he pulled it out, it was just fair as it could be. And then the third one was, took water and poured it out, and it became blood. You know, the old devil is a sinful serpent. Leprosy is a type of sin. You know, in the Bible, a lot of times leprosy is associated with sin, you know, and you know, the devil is the old serpent, the snake, I'm going to call him. You know, he will put a lot of ornery things in our minds, you know, and a lot of bad thoughts, you know, and we need to get that out just as quick as we can. And then when sin does, it's like the leprosy. And then the third part was the blood that the water turned into blood, you know, and it takes that blood of Jesus Christ to wash away that sin. Nothing else will do it. There's not a thing that a person can do in sin to get rid of that sin except the blood of Jesus Christ. And you know, God has a purpose for each and every one of us. I've got just a minute or two here. I want to look at the memory verse. I said I kind of wanted to look at it here. For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. You know, have you ever lost anything? Have you ever lost anything? It weighs on your mind, don't it? You know, well, you know, God lost man. And you know, it weighed on his mind, you know. And he knew that there was one remedy for sin, and that was his dear, only begotten Son of Jesus Christ. And he sent him on a mission, the mission of Jesus. Moses had a mission that is something he was sent to do. Later, Jesus had a mission too. He was sent from heaven to save people out of sin. How we should thank him for coming to save us. And you know, that is a whole lot more important than saving the children of Israel out of Egypt. Not that that wasn't important, but the salvation of their soul is a whole lot more important than the salvation under bondage and slavery and all. And you know, I'm not trying to belittle bondage and slavery and all that, because that's where the devil puts us when we're in sin, in bondage and slavery. And we got to have them chains broken. And the only thing that'll break those chains is the blood of Jesus Christ. Okay, our next lesson is the oppression of slavery.